Thank you for tuning in to Breaking Down the Barriers on KZI 88.7 FM. I'm your host, Beverly Reeves, and with me today as co-host is Ms. Loretta Taylor. Breaking Down the Barriers is an initiative of the Austin Independent School District. This program was created to provide information on resources, programs, and district initiatives to support our families in preparing each and every student to succeed. Today's guest is Ms. Maria Arabbo, the Refugee Family Support Services Specialist for Austin ISD. She will be sharing information with us about refugee services in the Austin Public Schools. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for being with us.
Absolutely.
Can you please tell us about yourself and your role at AISD?
Yes, I am the Refugee Coordinator for the district, and our office actually handles all refugee students in AISD. Currently, we have 1,069 students and around 50 more students that are about to enroll within the month.
Wow. Okay.
And what we do is we are a small team of 4 of us. I speak Spanish and English, and my team speaks Arabic, Farsi, Dari, and Burmese, parent support coordinators. And with them, we help to facilitate the integration of refugees in AISD.
So do you work with any agencies? How do the families find out about our services here within the district?
It's an excellent question. Basically, the refugees come into the United States already with the refugee status, and they go in through the resettlement agencies. In Austin, we have 2, Caritas and RST, Refugee Services of Texas. Both of those agencies will email me, basically alerting me to the family demographics of a new family that's arrived. And as a result, we then start the placement process. So we look at where they live, we look at their date of birth, and we designate a school for them, which is already part of AISD policy. And within that month, the family will need to get Medicaid, get their vaccinations, get settled in, and usually by about 1 month, they will enroll at that campus.
Okay. And what resources do you provide?
So we actually provide quite a bit. Being as small of a team as we are, we do a lot of collaboration with outside agencies like Interfaith Action of Central Texas, both resettlement agencies, Center for Survivors of Torture, the Wellness Clinic over at Refugee Services of Texas. We work with the Refugee Health Clinic. But in-house, we actually do a lot around interpretation and translation, because one of the biggest challenges that our families face is that they speak many different languages, none of which are English or Spanish. And so it's a bit challenging for them to access the information that is needed. We also provide orientations to all of the families, either at Caritas or RST when they first arrive within that first critical month. We do a lot of work with the teachers. We provide tutoring services through the UT Arabic flagship program in tandem, as well as Amana Refugee Services. We try and support students, teachers through PDs, through professional development opportunities as well. And we just are constantly keeping up with the resources and then disseminating that to the district. We also do a lot around special education placement. We have a lot of families that come in that will likely need special education services. And so we work with the diagnosticians in the schools, making sure they're first enrolled, and then we do interpretation and translation as needed to make sure that those students are identified accordingly.
So the list of services is vast, but it would seem like the students would need a lot of social support because it's going to be their first time in a public school system in the United States. How do we work with our campuses to make sure that the students don't fall through the cracks?
It's a really great question, and it's quite a challenge because right now the number of refugees we've received this year already surpasses what we had all of last year.
Wow, okay.
So the depth of the need is greater than it has ever been before. We work with the campuses, we work with communities and schools, we work with counselors, and we actually work with outside agencies who provide, I would call them refugee support groups or mental health groups at different campuses. Right now they're at both elementary and middle school as well.
And I know they're, depending upon their residents, they're spread out through the district. Do you know about how many schools we have refugees in?
Yes, currently we have refugees at 87 different campuses across the district.
Okay, wow. And what countries, can you list some countries that they represent?
Absolutely. Primarily right now, most of our refugees come from the Middle East, I would say Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. We have a lot of refugees as well from Burma, from Congo, from Bhutan, Nepalese as well. I believe that covers the majority of them right now.
Okay, wow. So with the small office, you said you have 4 people in your office total. How do you divide your time? How do you best support the families when they come in?
What we often try to do is meet the need as it arises.
Okay.
We are continuously addressing immediate issues that come up at the district or at the campuses, whether it's a phone call home, whether it's the mandatory parent-teacher conferences that just happen at the elementary campuses, and we work to get interpreters for that. We do a lot of short-term thinking, a lot of short-term actions, and a lot of long-term planning. We also collaborate very closely with the Department of English Language Learners because they are really addressing the educational needs of the students. We work more on the kind of social emotional needs of the students and connecting them to resources within the district and outside of the district.
Okay. So the working with the students and the social support, social and emotional support, the educational support provided through the Department of English Language Learners, how does the family fall into this? Do we provide or at least refer families to support groups? Because I heard you mention survivors of torture, and so some of the families are coming in with a lot of issues that they need to work through. So how do we make sure that the family unit is actually supported also?
One of the things we do is a lot of referrals out because we as a team can't obviously take on all of the families and their needs. The other thing that we do is, for example, if something like a lunch application has lapsed, we take care of that for the entire family in-house. Okay. If you're looking at something like mental health needs, we do referrals for Center for Survivors of Torture. We hold a lot of meetings where parents are included, and what that means is that in those meetings a lot of other issues arise, and from there we just connect either to the case manager if they're still under case management, or we connect them to an existing agency. AISD is also doing a great job right now with adult ESL, for example, and we are connecting them to that by doing translations of the flyers so that the families know that these are happening at certain campuses on certain dates. They're piecemeal approaches to what we're doing, but we genuinely take it a little bit at a time and see what the need is, and then immediately look at what resources exist.
And you and I both serve on a committee where we're looking to try and systematically put supports together for international students, refugees, and other families who may be coming to the district for the first time from other countries. With that work, what we're hearing is, you know, there are some issues that are in the schools that the students are experiencing that they might not have had to deal with in their home countries. Bullying, the social middle school issues, those kinds of things. Sure. Because some countries, the students may not have had a formal education Absolutely. At all. What do you see the district doing, you know, along with the partnerships that we already have and us working together in our internal teams? What do you see us being able to do to really support the students and help them to feel like they have a voice and the ability to come to us even though language may be a barrier?
Well, I do know the district is taking this growth in refugees, which is a wonderful thing for the district. It adds so much to the depth and the culture of the district at large. They're looking at this and trying to figure out what kind of either educational approaches we can do by possibly creating new types of programming or maybe new types of schools in the future. And also, we've recently added language access that's just being tried out now through the Language Line, which is a telephone language service. It is an issue in the sense that there are so many students who need interpreters simultaneously, and there's only a few of us. We do also work with Caritas, and we're not the only department to work with this outside agency that provides so many different languages. And so the Department of English Language Learners as well is working to address at least this particular issue you mentioned about voice and having the ability to come to the table. The other thing we have to remember is that while we, I think, culturally are often encouraged to stand up for ourselves and advocate for ourselves, many of our refugees come from cultures where that is not the traditional norm. And so part of it during the orientations, we talk about this. We talk about the expectations with the schools. We talk about attendance and how here it is legally mandated. We talk about issues around language access and how you have the right to ask for an interpreter and the district will provide it. So I think part of it is the district certainly coming to the table and saying, here's the needs and here's what we're willing to do. But part of it is just helping our parents be more engaged with education in a way that they necessarily aren't comfortable or used to, depending on which home country they come from.
Right. So we've talked about languages and countries. The process you mentioned earlier when refugees actually come into the United States, it's about a month-long process before we even get to enroll the students in school. How do we get an understanding on where they should be placed as far as grade levels if they haven't? Do we go by age only because they're most likely not coming with transcripts and the things that we're used to receiving if they're coming from another state? How do we make those decisions?
So the decisions actually are already set up by AISD policies. We don't do anything different. Technically, I'm the one that gives the recommendations to my team and I, to the case managers of these new families that are about to enroll. And we really just look at date of birth. We try to get a sense of educational background, and sometimes we're able to place students 1 year back. For high school, it's very tricky because all students are placed in 9th grade regardless of their age. And the reason that is because if you have a student, let's say, who's 17 and is placed in, as a junior in 11th grade, you're giving this refugee student who's learning English 2 years to graduate. Most native English speakers would not be able to pull that off, let alone somebody who's just learning the language and the culture. That piece around high school in particular is very traumatic for some of our students who've already, completed 3-4 years of high school and are having to come back and start over again. And I know the district is looking at that, specifically with older students, at what we can possibly do to help them access education in a way that's beneficial to them. But right now it is just based on address and home campus as well as your grade. We do also have International High School, which is a unique program over in East Austin, which takes in 9th and 10th grade students and ages 14 to 16. And this program is specifically designed for newcomers, not just refugees, anybody who's brand new to the country, who hasn't attended school anywhere else in the country. And the teachers there are specifically working with the students on language acquisition. So it's actually a really good fit for most of our students that are 9th and 10th grade.
Right. And we had them on the show a few weeks back.
Great.
And we also talked about the International Welcome Center. And do you work closely with them when you're working with the families?
Yes, we're starting to. So one of the issues around the International Welcome Center is that they're not yet officially set up for interpreters in the way that they need to be. But we do work with them. Some of the things that we do is actually assist with registration, and in the summer, when most of our refugees arrive and come to enroll, we hold mass registration events at different campuses. We've worked closely in this past year with the International Welcome Center to do language testing for high school students and middle school students, and then actually do the registrations on site as well. We expect that in the future, centralized registration will likely, specifically for maybe newcomers, would be very beneficial and may be implemented. But for now, we work as much as we can with the IWC.
And our next question for you is, what are some misconceptions about teaching refugee students?
It's a great question, and one that's really pertinent right now with as many students as we have in the district. I think one of the larger misconceptions about education is that you have to speak the native language of the students that you're teaching. At some campuses where there are 50+ students, that's obviously impossible to do. And really, learning English as a second language actually requires the proper strategies and curriculum for sure, but also full language immersion in the language that you're trying to teach, and so in English in this case. When you have translation or interpretation that's available at that moment while you're teaching a student English, the problem is that students will often tune out the English and wait for the piece that's going to be interpreted to them. And in general, it slows the process down of learning a second language. I think one of the things we have to remember is that adults can learn a second language, but for children, they learn much, much faster and much more receptive. And so hopefully, while it is very stressful for many of our teachers, we can look at these students with a little bit more calm and understanding that in the long run, they will absolutely learn to adapt. They will be able to integrate. They will pass all of the standardized testing and graduate, as is evidenced by our graduation rates with refugee students. The challenge really, and the true challenge, is with students with interrupted formal education, SIFE. These students, especially when they're middle school, high school, secondary, they will come to us with possibly no or little formal education or a very large gap due to whatever situation was happening in the home country. And so at that point, when you enter a student in high school and he's just learning to read or write, maybe he doesn't read or write in their own home language, then you're looking at this student is also expected to pass standardized testing. So that is a very true challenge. But again, because language immersion is so important when learning a second language, it's for even these students, it's important that we don't just rely on using the native language of that student to have them learn English as a second language.
Well, speaking of standardized tests, are the students expected to take the test as soon as they get in if they're in a testing grade?
From 5th grade up, they are expected to take the test. Now, if they're shown to be students with interrupted formal education, there's actually a period where they take the test, but it doesn't count in accountability. And that's not obviously forever. It's a short period of time. And the expectation is that the students will learn quickly enough to then have these scores counted towards the school and towards the student's ultimate goal of graduation.
I can't imagine trying to learn geometry and other difficult subjects in a language that that's not your first language. So having our refugee students with us is really, it's a good thing as far as I'm concerned, because it increases the diversity in our schools. We get to learn about different cultures. We get to learn about the ways that different countries work. We're learning about languages that we had never heard of. And you and I have had conversations about trying to find interpreters for languages that we weren't familiar with in the recent past in Texas. So how are we able to really help change that paradigm where some individuals may believe that our refugee students may be a burden when they're really an asset to our district?
Honestly, I think this happens just by spending time with, refugee families and refugee students. And I've even seen teachers who were completely new to working with refugee students, who were immersed in summer school programming with refugees and walked away saying that was the most rewarding experience I've ever had. So I think part of it is just a lack of exposure. Part of it is fear of the unknown. We're not necessarily a culture that's comfortable with things that we don't understand or people we don't understand. But I think I've really seen the district and the city at large, Austin, Texas, come very open to refugees and really come alive at the idea of integrating these official new citizens of our city. So I really think exposure, I think working with students on a daily basis. Some of my favorite students, some of a lot of people's favorite students were refugee students, because the thing we have to remember is that these students they're survivors. I mean, they have been through unbelievable hardship to get here. And so 99% of the time when they attend school, they're there wanting to learn, wanting to succeed. They've gone through so many different challenges and they're finally here to make their dreams come true. And so I think the more we get to work with refugee students, and as our refugee population grows, I really think that they're going to be fully accepted into Austin ISD and Austin, Texas.
Do we keep a finger on the pulse of ebbs and flows of refugees coming into the city? I believe Austin is a relocation city.
Yeah, the state of Texas actually relocates more refugees than any other state in the U.S. We are, I believe, the third in terms of numbers, so Houston, Dallas, and then Austin. We work very closely with the resettlement agencies who are directly connected to the refugee resettlement program and will actually alert us to any shifts. This year we've had about a 17% increase, and that's why we're seeing such higher numbers. And we also have a general sense of the trends in terms of, while we have students right now from the Middle East, we're seeing a lot more students from Africa, from Congo, from Rwanda, and we expect that to be a new trend, which will mean that we as an office, we as a district, will obviously have to shift a little bit in the services that we provide to deal with the different students that are arriving here.
Okay. As we follow those trends, there are going to be different services that are needed. Like you said, we're going to have to make those adjustments. As we see refugees coming from these countries that we haven't worked as closely with in the past, what do you and your staff do to maybe familiarize yourselves or become more closely acquainted with the culture of that country prior to working with the families?
Well, there's a lot of great resources out in all over, especially on the internet. It can be quite easy to do just research on whether or not you have a family from Congo. Well, what does that mean? What have they, gotten to be here? We tend to, right now, my staff, they're actual native speakers and are often from the countries that refugees are coming from. Many of them have actually come through the same resettlement process. So that is extremely beneficial in terms of wealth of knowledge for our office because they understand the process. But for example, with Congolese refugees, this is a new country for us in terms of the new numbers we're getting. So one of the things we're doing is we're actually bringing somebody on that speaks the critical languages, Kinyarwanda, Swahili, and French, to be able to address that. And she's also actually came here as a refugee herself. But again, there's such a wealth of information right now around refugees. Refugees are a really important topic, which makes the background information a lot more accessible, and that's actually something that we often pass to the campuses that are receiving new refugees from, let's say, Afghanistan or Rwanda, for example.
Okay. Well, we're about out of time. Did you have any more questions for Ms. Arabbo before we wrap it up?
I don't have any more questions, but I do want to thank you for your time and for that wonderful information.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you for all the things that you do for our refugee families. I'm sure a lot of people did not know that we even had this program within the district. So I'm glad to have you and your staff here for us.
Thank you.
So thank you again for joining us on Breaking Down the Barriers. To keep up with information in the district and the AISD community, like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at AISD_BDB. Also watch Breaking Down the Barriers on AISD's Channel 22, AISD.TV, every Tuesday and Thursday evening at 7:30 p.m. and Sunday mornings at 10:30 a.m. We are your hosts, Beverly Reeves and Loretta Taylor, and we look forward to talking to you next time on Breaking Down the Barriers.